On August 26, 1071, near a fortress town called Manzikert in eastern Anatolia, an emperor was dragged before a foreign sultan as a prisoner. Hours earlier, he had commanded one of the largest armies Byzantium had fielded in generations, marching east with confidence to crush the Turkish raiders probing his empire's frontier. By nightfall, his army had disintegrated, his officers had fled or betrayed him, and he himself was captured on the battlefield, the first Byzantine emperor taken prisoner by an enemy in the empire's 700-year history. The Sultan who captured him did not want to destroy Byzantium. He offered surprisingly generous terms. The emperor was eventually released, but the empire he returned to no longer had a place for him. And the door that opened at Manzikert that afternoon, into the heart of Anatolia, would never fully close again. This is 1071, the day Byzantium's rule over Anatolia broke. By the end of this video, you will understand why a single afternoon battle changed the ethnic, religious, and political map of Asia Minor for the next 1,000 years. You will learn about the Byzantine emperor who marched east to secure his frontier, and the decisions that unraveled his army before the real fighting even began. You will learn about the Seljuk Sultan who did not actually want this battle, and who treated his captured enemy with a generosity that surprised everyone. You will learn why the battle itself was not the disaster. The true catastrophe came afterward, in the chaos that consumed Byzantium. And you will understand why 1071 marks the beginning of Anatolia's transformation into what would eventually become Turkey. 1071, the year the gate opened and never fully closed again. By 1071, the Byzantine Empire, the direct continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire, has controlled Anatolia for over 1,000 years. This is not a peripheral territory. It is the empire's heartland, its primary source of soldiers, its agricultural backbone, home to a population overwhelmingly Greek-speaking and Christian. But this heartland is under increasing pressure. The Seljuk Turks, a Turkic dynasty converted to Islam, have built a rapidly expanding empire across Persia, Mesopotamia, and the Caucasus. Seljuk raiding parties have been probing Byzantine Anatolia for years, eroding the security of its eastern frontier. Byzantium, meanwhile, is dealing with internal weakness. Decades of court intrigue and a decline in traditional military institutions have left the empire less prepared than it might have been a century earlier. Once reliable frontier defenses have deteriorated, and the empire increasingly relies on mercenary forces of varying loyalty. Into this situation steps Romanos Diogenes, a general who becomes emperor in 1068 through marriage to the widowed empress Eudokia. A soldier by temperament, he sees the deteriorating eastern frontier as the central problem his reign must solve. By 1071, he is ready for what he intends to be a decisive campaign. The empire's traditional strength had long rested on a system where soldier farmers held land in exchange for military service, creating a large reserve of loyal, invested manpower along the frontier. By the 11th century, this system has eroded significantly, replaced by a more centralized but also more fragile reliance on professional and mercenary forces whose commitment to the empire's long-term survival is considerably weaker than that of the farmer soldiers who preceded them. Romanos assembles a large army in 1071, one of the largest forces Byzantium has fielded in generations, drawn from across the empire and supplemented by significant foreign mercenary contingents, including Norman, Frankish, and Turkic troops in Byzantine service. This diversity introduces a serious vulnerability. A force, this heterogeneous, mixing regular troops with mercenaries of transactional loyalty, depends heavily on strong central command. Byzantine internal politics, already fractious, extends into the army itself. Romanos lacks universal support among the aristocratic factions in Constantinople, some of whom view him as an outsider who seized power through marriage rather than legitimate succession. The campaign moves toward Manzikert, near Lake Van, which Romanos' forces capture relatively easily. But Sultan Alp Arslan, campaigning in Syria rather than anticipating a major Byzantine offensive here, moves quickly to respond. Notably, and often lost in popular retellings, Alp Arslan does not particularly want this confrontation. His strategic priorities lie south, in his rivalry with the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. He reportedly attempts to negotiate peace before the battle. Romanos, confident in his numerical advantage, does not accept. The two armies meet at Manzikert on August 26, 1071. The battle unfolds in a way that reflects less Seljuk tactical brilliance and more the structural fragility of the Byzantine army. Alp Arslan's forces rely heavily on mobile, mounted archers. Warfare well suited to open terrain, which Byzantine heavy infantry struggles to pin down. Seljuk forces employ hit-and-run tactics, avoiding direct engagement while wearing down the Byzantine formations and drawing them into an exhausting pursuit. As Romanos attempts to withdraw toward camp as evening approaches, a standard defensible maneuver, the situation deteriorates. The rear guard, commanded by Andronikos Doukas, a member of a rival aristocratic family with long-standing tensions with Romanos, either misunderstands the retreat order or, as many historians believe, deliberately fails to support the main force. A decision that may reflect internal Byzantine rivalries as much as battlefield confusion. Whatever the cause, the withdrawal collapses into disorder. Seeing the Byzantine formation breaking apart, Seljuk forces press their advantage. Significant numbers of the foreign mercenaries break and flee outright, rather than continue fighting a clearly failing cause. Romanos, fighting with his personal guard, is wounded and captured, an outcome without precedent in Byzantine imperial history. No reigning emperor had previously been taken prisoner on the battlefield by a foreign power. What happens next is one of the more genuinely surprising episodes in medieval military history. Alp Arslan, presented with his captured imperial enemy, does not humiliate or execute him. Historical accounts describe a meeting in which the Sultan treats Romanos with considerable respect, discussing the terms of his eventual release. The terms Alp Arslan offers are, by the standards of medieval warfare, remarkably moderate. Rather than demanding total capitulation, the Sultan requests a substantial ransom, certain frontier territories, and a marriage alliance intended to formalize peace. Romanos is released after a brief captivity, expected to return to Constantinople and resume his rule. This complicates any simple narrative of Manzikert as a moment of civilizational conquest. Alp Arslan's actual strategic objective was not the systematic conquest of Byzantine Anatolia. His focus remained oriented toward the Fatimids to his south. The peace terms suggest a sultan who wanted a stabilized cooperative frontier, not the wholesale collapse of Byzantine authority. What actually produces that collapse is not the battle, and not any coordinated Seljuk campaign that follows it. It is something that happens entirely within Byzantine borders, after Romanos begins his journey home. Romanos returns to an empire that no longer wants him. His political rivals in Constantinople, including the Doukas family, whose member had commanded the disastrous rearguard, use the defeat as justification to depose him. Michael Doukas is proclaimed emperor in his absence. When Romanos attempts to reclaim his throne, civil war erupts. Romanos is defeated, captured a second time by his own countrymen, and blinded, a traditional Byzantine method of disqualifying a political rival. He dies shortly afterward from complications of this treatment. This internal civil war, not Manzikert itself, is what truly opens Anatolia to sustain Turkish settlement. With the empire consumed by internal conflict, its Anatolian frontier is left almost entirely unattended. Various Turkish groups, not necessarily under Alp Arslan's direct authority, since the Sultan himself dies in 1072 in an unrelated incident, begin moving into the Anatolian interior, not as a conquering army executing a grand plan, but as opportunistic settlers filling a vacuum left by a Byzantine state too consumed with its own power struggles to defend its eastern territories. Over the following decade, Turkish principalities established themselves across large portions of Anatolia. By 1077, a Seljuk relative named Suleiman ibn Kutulmish establishes the Sultanate of Rum, extending deep into central Anatolia, a permanent Turkish presence in a region that had been continuously Byzantine and Greek-speaking for over a millennium. The lasting significance of Manzikert lies less in the immediate battlefield outcome and more in what it set in motion. Byzantium does not collapse in 1071. The empire continues for nearly 4 more centuries until the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a date you know if you have watched our earlier video on that number. But the empire after Manzikert is permanently different. Anatolia, the demographic and economic heartland that had sustained Byzantine power for centuries, is never fully recovered. The empire that emerges is smaller, more dependent on its European territories, and permanently weakened. The demographic and cultural transformation of Anatolia unfolds gradually over subsequent centuries, through Turkish migration, gradual conversion to Islam, and the establishment of Turkish political structures across territory that had been Greek and Christian for over 1,000 years. This is not a single event, but a long process, and Manzikert is its beginning, not its completion. It is also worth emphasizing, for fairness, that this transformation was neither simple nor uniformly violent conquest on one side versus passive victimhood on the other. Byzantine political dysfunction played as significant a role in the loss of Anatolia as any Seljuk strategy did. The Turkish Anatolian civilization that eventually emerges over the following centuries develops its own rich and complex history, entirely independent of the specific circumstances of its origin at Manzikert, a reminder that the beginning of a historical process rarely determines everything that follows from it. Here is what 1071 actually represents. It would be simple to tell this story as a single decisive battle that transferred a civilization from one people to another in a single afternoon. The evidence does not support that. Alp Arslan did not seek to conquer Anatolia. He offered peace before the battle and generous terms after it. The Sultan who captured a Byzantine emperor treated him, by the standards of the age, with remarkable restraint. What actually opened Anatolia to lasting Turkish settlement was not Seljuk ambition, but Byzantine self-destruction, a political culture so consumed by internal rivalry that a captured, ransomed, and released emperor could be blinded and killed by his own people, rather than allowed to return to his throne, at the precise moment his empire most needed unified leadership. This is a pattern this channel has returned to repeatedly. The dramatic, memorable battle is rarely the true mechanism of historical transformation. It is the visible flashpoint that exposes deeper structural weaknesses already present before the fighting began. Manzikert did not conquer Anatolia for the Turks. It revealed that Byzantium could no longer hold it, and in the chaos of a self-inflicted civil war, an entire civilization's grip on its own heartland slipped away, not to a foreign army marching in triumph, but to the empty space left behind by an empire that chose, in its moment of greatest need, to tear itself apart instead. 1071. The year a Byzantine emperor was captured, treated with unexpected mercy by his enemy, and then destroyed by his own people the moment he came home. The battle lasted a single afternoon. The consequences reshaped Anatolia for the next 1,000 years, not because of what happened on that battlefield, but because of what Byzantium did to itself afterward. If this story made you think, leave a comment. Was the fall of Byzantine Anatolia a Seljuk conquest, or a Byzantine self-inflicted collapse the Seljuks simply moved into? Subscribe to the Vault of Numbers. Every week, one number, one story history forgot to tell you. The next number in the vault. In 1204, soldiers marching under the same cross that united Christendom turned their weapons on a Christian city instead. The wound from that day never fully closed. The vault remains open.